first thing that I'd like to do is just get your name and the correct spelling of it so I have it on tape.
Oh, okay. My name is August Storkman. Storkman.
Great. And where did you grow up here?
No, I'm kind of misplaced. I grew up in Idaho, southern Idaho. And then after I got in the service, eventually I ended up here at Fort Lewis.
Oh, okay.
But that was when I joined the Idaho National Guard in about 1936. I was much too young to be in the Army, but I played trumpet, and they had a National Guard band over in this little town right next to us, Caldwell, Idaho. So one of the fellows that was in that, his sister was my girlfriend, and so he said, come on over. So there were 3 or 4 of us used to drive the 9 miles between Nampa and Caldwell and go to drill. Well, first of all, we went to summer camp, and that was all. We were supposed to go to summer camp, and then they'd turn us loose for the rest of the year, but we decided we'd like to stay in, and so nobody questioned our ages or anything else. We played music, and so then...
How old were you? When were you born?
1920.
So you were...
16.
16, okay.
Then we got into the start of World War II. They began to activate some of these different units. And we were activated on April 1st of 1941. And it was a field artillery unit. We went from our home and we went to Cheyenne, Fort Warren. And then when December the 7th came along, why they shipped us out here real fast. When I say out here, from Cheyenne to Fort Lewis, we didn't realize, nobody knew that we were the coastal defense of the United States. Us with our 155 howitzers that would shoot 6 miles, and we're supposed to protect from those battleships that could have come in. Anyhow, it was interesting. I stayed with the band for a while, but then it got a little too much, and I shouldn't say too much about that, but being with all those guys, I wasn't interested. So...
are you saying the band had too much fun, or?
Well, on the side there were things going on that I wasn't too excited about. We had, by that time, they had changed us from the Field Artillery Regiment, which was an old-fashioned setup. They changed to individual battalions, and when they did that, why, we had no more headquarters that required a band or was authorized a band. So then we went to some engineer unit for a while, a matter of a few months. And then we were shipped down to Camp Adair in Oregon to form a new division. And we started a 70th Infantry Division, was a new unit. And there was an armored cavalry unit right next door to us, so it was a good way I got out of the band and got into this armored cavalry. And by then I got to be a section sergeant in the scout section, and they came around one Sunday when everybody was off on their resting and said, we need you and you to go to OCS. And I said, well, if cavalry, and no, it's infantry. But I decided, oh, what the heck? So I did. Went to infantry OCS at Fort Benning, and after I got done with that, I was shipped to Texas. I can't say the name of the
Fort Benning?
No, that's Georgia.
Georgia. Well, I'm trying to think now that it all becomes a border.
Yeah, I don't think it shows here either. Anyhow, I was there for about 2 months, and then I got shipped overseas. I went to.
How old were you when you got shipped overseas?
Oh, by this time, I was. Got to stop and think. 24, I think it was.
So you were an old man.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, compared to a lot of them.
A lot of nuts. I was in hopes I could tell from this. Remember, in November 44, I got out of OCS from Fort Benning, and then I was on Mineral Wells, Texas. What was the post there? Anyhow, I went overseas, and it was the end of 44, start of 45. So I didn't get into a lot of combat, but because I would banged around from different units here in the States.
Where did they ship you to overseas?
Well, I ended up in Europe. I stopped at Glasgow, got on a train, got off the train in Southampton, onto a little coastal freighter, and we unloaded on the big floats that they had put in Le Havre, and started walking. Anyhow, they were hurting for officers, and boy, we just got shoved right along. I don't think I was 4 or 5 days from the time I put my foot down in Le Havre until I was sticking my feet down in a hole to get in. I always laughed at Willie and Joe cartoons. You ever?
Yeah.
Okay. The two of them are there, and one of them says, "I can't get no lower, Willie. Me buttons is in the way."
You understood that.
Oh, hey, amen.
So when you, because coming in, the war had been going for a while now.
Yeah.
So because a lot of the kids that went in the beginning, they didn't have the faintest idea what they were getting into.
Right.
Did you know what you were headed to?
Oh, well, I was on active duty before the war ever started. See, it was Army, even though we sounded like in the band. What the heck? We would. It was a pretty strenuous thing. We played a lot. Played our instruments. We had the band rehearsed an awful lot. We also we were a dance band, and we were playing for all kinds of USO things. We played in South Tacoma USO and Fort Lewis, of course, and we traveled with some of the USO shows. We would get up and play reveille, march up and down the battery or company streets, and play the old-fashioned way, and then we we'd go back and get our bunks made up like everybody else. While we were already up and marching up and down, while these other guys were waking up.
And you played trumpet.
Trumpet. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember a song that you play? What were some of the big tunes for the?
Well, it depends on what you're.
At the USO Club.
The USO Club, all the Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw stuff, all those. We had a book that 6 or 8 inches thick of some of them were done by hand, and then there were some of those that were. We had some friends in good places. There's one fellow he'd do 2 or 3 sides for some of these gal singers, and I can't say which ones now, but they'd do 2 or 3 sides for them, and then we would get a handwritten copy. Said, try this out because I think I know what it's going to sound like, but I'd like to know. So we'd play it, and we even had a real crude recording machine. We could record some of it for them. Anyhow, it was interesting, but there were also, like I said, too many other things going on. But, got overseas and got into all kinds of stuff. And just as the war was over, we had, did they tell us then? We crossed the Inn River into Austria in the little town of Braunau, which was Hitler's birthplace. And I always thought that was kind of funny. We got across the river, and there's a fellow, an Austrian, was baking bread, and he hauled out some bread and handed us, as we were going along, handed us some hot black bread. Oh gosh, it was good. But a couple days after that, we got a message that I was to take a platoon of my platoon. I was a platoon leader at this point. I take my platoon, and we have some other people go with us, and we were to go up into the mountains in Austria to a salt mine and secure the salt mine, because they supposedly, the story we got, there were the Hungarian crown jewels were stashed there and hidden. So it was kind of interesting, the intrigue that went along with all this. But we got up and discovered that the Germans had set things up to blow up the mine in case they lost the war. They were going to blow everything. But the Austrians that worked around there, they weren't about to have that happen, because these salt mines had supported their families for generation after generation, 200-300 years. So they let one bomb go off, which closed the tunnel, and then they could just sit back, and they knew very well that no one could get in and steal any of the stuff. Well, we were there for, and I want to say 2 days, and we got another little message that one of the German Nazis, they were later tried in Nuremberg. This Ernst Kaltenbrunner was his name. He was hiding in the mountains up above us. So we got word, and so we took off. I always remember this. It was 11 o'clock. We were underway, and the war was officially over as of midnight. So we were, anyhow, we went up and caught the fellow, and we had no idea what sort of person he was, but we caught him and took him back down, and he got hauled away. They brought in some armored cars and gosh knows what else to this little village that was at the end of the road. They came and got him, and we stayed there for 3 or 4 days, but that night that we came back with Kaltenbrunner, I took one squad of one of my platoon, a squad from my platoon, and I went along, and the company commander, along with 2 or 3 free Austrian people. They didn't want to get in any fight or anything, but they wanted to see that everybody got picked up. Anyhow, we came back down that night, and they had the Austrians that were the free Austrians, I say. They have a party, and so they had people, all around. They were having a big wing that night, and the fellow that was our executive officer, he had a few too many beers, and he got obnoxious. He said, "That son of a bitch is a Nazi. I'm going to kill him." And we were trying to haul him away. After all, this is we were invited, and we knew that as soon as the Austrians got their act together, why they'd be under their own government too. And so, anyway, they raised Cain about this guy. We got our fellow out, and was it about three days later we moved out. I've skipped this village, a little town that we went to, was Altaussee, and it was the end of the road in those days. And that was it. When you get to the center of Altaussee, there's just a little town square, maybe a room enough for us to turn a Jeep around there. But most of the town was on beyond toward, and a beautiful little lake right there. Well, anyhow, we, where was I going to go?
Did you ever go? Because
I went back after about 2 weeks. I went to a school, and then I came back, and we had been moved out. So I went back to Altaussee just because I was interested. And the fellow that was the town major at that point, there was the American officer that came in to take over the administration until they got straightened out. Anyhow, he said, "You'd be interested to know that the day after you folks moved out, the counterintelligence people, or some of those government people, came in and picked up this fellow that your buddy was getting so hostile about." Oh, and this fellow was big, tall fellow, and wore the knickers, and the socks and all that, and what kind of a tweed coat sort of thing. Anyhow, and he was teaching everybody to do the Lambeth Walk. Now that was an old style dance step. Anyhow, he's teaching, and he spoke real good English. But a lot of people spoke English there. Anyhow, this guy, they said, he came and they picked him up and hauled him away. He was Lord Ha Ha. Now, I don't know, this is, what was the woman that broadcast for the Japanese?
Tokyo Rose.
Yeah, okay. This was similar for the Germans. He was an Englishman that was doing the same thing as Tokyo Rose. And so we could have saved some trouble if we'd let Chuck have his way. Anyhow, that was...
That's right, because I have heard, now that you say that, now I connected that, I've heard one of the other vets mention hearing Lord Ha on the airwaves and all that. In fact, I think it was a flyer that we had talked to, and Lord Ha was telling them where they were going.
Where they're going to go. Yeah.
Did the salt mines? Did you ever end up going in the salt mines, or what happened to the salt mines?
The salt mine. The salt mines were not opened up for a while. They have formed. The U.S. government formed this archives, and I think I've got a. Yeah, some of that stuff that he's photographing. It was a special commission or group that took care of all the art treasures. The Germans had looted all over, even some of their own people. The Jewish people that had anything at all. It wasn't just money, but all their paintings and all kinds of artifacts. And the Germans figured, well, we want to save these things, so they started putting things away in the salt mines. The reason they did that was the salt mine was, the humidity was very stable, and it was fairly low. So they moved all this stuff. Well, then it got later in the war, the Germans were sure, they decided if we can't have it, nobody's going to have it. So they started hauling all kinds of demolitions in, sticking them in there were, I don't know whether there were more, there were 3 or 4 salt mines that had been worked like that. Anyhow, the Austrians, when they realized that they were wiring all these bombs up, they had aircraft bombs. In fact, there's a picture, I think I have it there. These guys, when they first took some of the stuff out of the salt mine, they're like a 2-ton blockbuster from the aerial bomb that they had one of those or some of those in there. They were just going to blow the whole works up. But they took the Austrians decided we'll take care of that. They just wired the outermost bomb. It was like 500-pound bomb, and it was enough so it would blow the tunnel shut. But then once the tunnel is blown shut, how are you going to, without cleaning up, and of course it takes a while to dig that stuff out. So anyhow, they had successfully done what we were supposed to do. Like I say, we were told that they're the Hungarian crown jewels. Well, eventually, and the paintings and stuff, and billions of dollars worth of stuff that they have returned. That was what this commission started to do, to first of all gather all these things together, paintings and statuary and whatever, and catalog it, and then decide or try to figure out who it had belonged to. before the Germans started taking it.
Wow.
Anyhow, there's another thing going on right about now. I have had a phone call right after yours from a lady in London, BBC, and they are wanting to talk to any of the U.S. personnel that would have been right there by that salt mine in Austria at the tail end of the war. And so far, I'm the only one that they have been able to find.
Wow.
There were two fellows that were on this commission, enlisted men that were on that commission that helped catalog. But that was, and they were there early on.
Because it's still an ongoing process
Yeah.
with some of this artwork, isn't it, that hasn't
Well,
been...
they've pretty much got it. I shouldn't even say, but it seems to me that they've pretty well got it straightened out. They've been working, they have disbanded that commission. Anyhow, that's a far cry from fighting the war.
I was going to say, yeah, one extreme to the other there that you... Now, you were wounded, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get wounded?
Well, it wasn't much of a... more a Band-Aid thing. Back near Castle. And I should have been hiding in a foxhole instead of standing up. I made it as far back as the battalion aid station and got patched up and went back. But that was...
It's more wounded than I've ever been.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the conditions you were in, because when you got there, it was still pretty active.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We were in... It was... In fact, it was hot and heavy up until the day after we crossed the Rhine, or the Inn River at Braunau. Then it was hectic, but we didn't get any. There was no real shooting match going on.
What did you mostly face? Were you facing? You weren't facing aerial attacks. You were soldier to soldier warfare.
Infantry and our artillery. Yeah, ground pounding.
Yeah.
We didn't get much aerial things going on because by that time the German Luftwaffe was pretty well knocked down. We had a few things. I remember one night we were in a convoy and all of a sudden the most horrendous it was this loud noise. It just enough so not back but sideways because we were sitting in the back of a 6x6 or a truck, and this thing went along. It was the first jet that we had heard about jets, but this was the first jet plane, and it was at night too, which was kind of scary.
Imagine a big flame.
No,
or not.
no, it went. It was by. Of course, you couldn't see it coming. It was after it went by, and of course, by that time, you didn't turn around to look because he was gone.
So, were you constantly on the move?
Once in a while, we'd stop for a day, but when we'd stop for a day, we'd dig a hole and maybe wait for the the armor to get ahead of us. We worked a lot with armored divisions, the 2nd Armored and the 4th Armored, and was in the 10th Armored. Some.
Now, when you say dig a hole, I know there's different types of foxholes. Were you digging a deep foxhole that you could stand in, or was it just
dig something down so you could get below the ground?
So was it so you could lay out flat?
Well, you dig until you got tired, or till you got a spot so you were. And if you were there very long and there was anything going on, why you were always digging deeper.
What was the terrain like? Was it forest land, or was it open fields? Or
we had a little bit of everything. There was some open field, and that was the thing that, well, it's a tall tale of an open field that our battalion commander wanted us to go on a skirmish line across. We started out with 94 men, and there was a platoon sergeant of the other platoon and me, and we started out with 94 people that morning, and when we got done we had 24. Both killed and wounded. So we stayed away from open fields as much as we could. Go along hedgerows and roads. And
how do you deal with that aspect of war? I mean, 94 and all of a sudden...
Try to forget about it.
Just
yeah.
Keep looking to the future. Is that?
There's something better coming along somewhere.
Did you ever think your number was up?
Oh, yeah. And there were times, there was one time I was reaching for a cigarette. I smoked a lot then. I was reaching for a cigarette, and the platoon sergeant reached over and he said, "You don't want that." Well, why? He said, "You know that you have opened 2 packages of cigarettes while we've been sitting in here." And I'd smoked both of them, both packages. And then I reached into the other pocket on the other side, and I had a little different field jacket and I had stuff stacked in. I'd cut the bottom of the pocket out, and I had the whole lining on the inside. I carry quite a pack of stuff. I stuck my hand down inside, right in my pocket, and that's where my compass in a canvas case, and a bunch of K rations. Stuck my hand down in there, and it was a mess. Just a gob of, and I couldn't see anything here on the outside, but started cleaning out. There'd been either 2 or 3 rounds had gone through right between me and that chewed up the K ration cans. Yeah, and that's when I stop and look and think. I think I looked as much at that. Well, one of the fellows that was kid that had been drafted, he was from, who was the Catholic priest in Nebraska, Father, they had a orphan kids, orphan boys. He took care.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Okay, this young fellow was a product of that. He was, I felt sorry for the poor kid. He should never have been drafted, but he was. But he came over one time, and along about this same time, and he said, "Lieutenant, what happened there?" And there were 2 holes in his tin hat. And you think about that for a minute. 2 holes. So then I looked, and there were, we call them, had a pet name for the little knit caps they wear underneath the tin hat. And there were 2 holes in that knit cap with a little bit of hair stuck in his hair. And I looked, and there was right, the only place it could have done that, right, just kind of flat there, like it would, but just burned a hole right through his hair down to the skin line.
Wow. And so when he was asking, he was serious. He didn't know.
Yeah, he didn't know. No.
Because of shock, do you think that he?
Well, he knew something had happened there, and he was looking at his tin hat, and like some of it was shock, some of it was he was just, it took a little longer to catch on.
What goes through, and maybe this is stuff that you have gotten rid of from your memory banks, but to be in a situation like that where people are shooting at you, does the world slow down or speed up or disappear? Or?
Well, I think some of it disappears. Well, I forgot about a lot of that stuff. Except my wife doesn't think so. One night, I hadn't been home too long, and in the middle of the night, all of a sudden, I woke up in the middle of the floor, crawling under the bed. Somebody, the car had gone by and backfired. And my immediate reaction was to get out of here, and I was out of bed, under the bed. Later on, it got to be halfway funny, but not very. And I think time helps quite a bit.
You come from a kind of a different generation than today, and the fact that my understanding from a lot of the vets I talked to is the war got done.
Mm-hmm.
They took off their uniforms. They went on with life.
Yeah. No.
And that was it.
No, why dwell on some of it? You got a job to do, and do it, and then we can. This sounds a little crazy, but then we can go have a beer and shoot the breeze and go get on with our living.
That's when we started this project, which was driven by vets because they wanted their story told in their words. And one of the arguments is that, well, they just want to glorify war. I haven't talked to any vets that I've seen that want to do that.
Well, my, not answer especially, but I'd ask a question, or do most of them really dwell on some of that stuff, or do they start talking about all the funny things that have happened? One time, we were in a series of houses, and we were kind of pinned in there by German tanks and God knows what all. But anyhow, out the kind of the side and the back of this guest house, it was like a tavern. There was it was all brick masonry work, and then there's a little brick house that was a chicken house. And we were having things going on, and pretty quick, here this character, it seemed to me I got all kinds of characters, came wandering back, and he said, "You want some chicken and dumplings?" And I, God, go back and we need your BAR out here. Oh, okay, but I'll get you some. Well, before that, he got me the chicken and dumplings. We'd have, that day we had a firefight, and then things had calmed down. And then somebody would shoot at something or see something to shoot at, and they were back into dust and stuff flying around, and then it would calm down. Well, in the middle of one of these things, one of the fellows in the platoon yelled at Brunson. He said, "God damn it, Brunson, you're burning the chicken." Next time, why, here he came back. He says, "I got to go out and get another chicken." And right in the middle of one of these things, why, we were having a bit of a firefight, he ducked down and out into this chicken pen, and here he came with another chicken. Another time, this same character, and he wasn't the only one that would do things like this, but I remember him in particular. We had a pretty good scrap going. Nobody was killed or anything like that, but it was a firefight that lasted a little while. And then we kind of took over, and what Germans were left had surrendered, so we had a safe zone, if you want to call it that. And I came wandering along, and here is Brunson. He's talking to this guy and giving him a cigarette, and he was this German like this. Here, smoke. Holy smoke, Brunson. He said he gave up. Oh, I don't have any argument with him.
That's where it seems like there's a very surreal aspect to war. Mm-hmm. That there's life that happens within war. Mm-hmm. That there's still somehow you find something that's normal within all of this. Is that?
Well, I don't know. I suppose you could say normal. We always would talk about ways things get back to normal, and even in the best of times, it's never going to be normal. It's normal for this time period of about 5 or 10 or 15 minutes.
What do you remember? Conversation you had with guys? I mean, if you were on a guard or a quiet time, what people talked about to pass time or to keep their mind away from the war, or
I think most of the things I remember was small talk. Give each other a bad time. For a good share of the time I was with this unit, there was the original company commander got trench foot, and they sent him back, and the next guy took over, and there were 3 of us in the company commander and his exec and me. So whenever there was anything like platoon-wise, well, I was one to take it. But we would get together and visit. I knew very little of these other two officers. The one that the company commander had been with the FBI. And I just noticed in some of the paperwork there were promotions from first lieutenant to captain, and that his name was on that, and then the same on the second paragraph from second lieutenant to first lieutenant, and my name was on that list in that group. I knew that he had, like I say, been in the FBI. He came from, I think it was Rochester or someplace like that in New York. The other fellow was from Montana. He's the one that we had a tough time with. By that time, we had got another officer in, so there were, instead of just 3 of us, or there were 4. And that's when Chuck got got a little stupid. I remember one time we were going into Castle, and there's a kind of a high spot, high plateau, and we came down off that, and the part of town we were working our way into was down below. And we were just kind of holding until companies on either side of us caught up. And so I came up to see what was going on. And Martinez, the company commander, said, "Come on in and sit down." He said, "We'll get another glass." "What do you mean?" "Well, he's going to bring us a bottle of champagne." "Huh?" Well, there was a civilian living in this house. I mean, a lot of our action at this point were in from house to house to house. Once we got across the Rhine River, why, we didn't have much digging like we had before. But anyhow, here this great big guy, and obviously he was the owner of the place, but he was being very precise and I don't want to say subservient, but that idea, you knew that he knew he was the conquered. Anyhow, he put out 3 glasses, and the 3 of us sat there and had 1 or 2 glasses of champagne out of that bottle. Then we went on our merry little way.
Were you married? Were you married or had a girlfriend back home? Or
Well, I was by that time. You got married just before I went to OCS.
high school sweetheart? Or?
No, I grew up in southwest Idaho near Boise, and I went on active duty with the Idaho National Guard. And then after the war started, we got to Fort Lewis. And most of my time was spent around Fort Lewis. And eventually I discovered I had a shirt-tail uncle that lived in the Tacoma area. And they took me in whenever I had, a Saturday or Sunday, any time off, I could go into to their place. And eventually I met, they had a daughter. Her her very close friend that they had gone to UPS together, CPS in those days, and I met her that way. We got married the week before Barb and Bob, my cousin. Well, anyhow, then I had no idea about going to OCS when this went on. But I was trying to remember. I don't think we've been married more than about, coming up February the 20th. March, April, May, June, and July. So I was married 6 months before I went to OCS. And it was kind of tough on Bev because, of course, you never plan for all these things, but she was pregnant when I went to OCS, and just barely, and we didn't realize that she had measles. Well, then they discovered that pregnancies are quite often real drastically affected by measles or any of the measles group. They hadn't figured that all out yet when this happened, and the doctor that took care of her eventually said, well, I'm writing this up for the medical journal because they're finding things about measles and pregnancies in Australia. Anyhow, she was, so then February, after I was overseas, and the baby lived for 12 days, I think it was. And I didn't find out anything at all until after, long after that. In fact, there were a couple letters that I got that had skipped ahead. And this one letter, I finally wrote back and I said, I've missed something somewhere. And of course that was a tough way for her to find out that I didn't know.
That had to be tough on both sides, for you and for...
yeah.
Another one of those the tragedies of war, of what?
Yeah.
Did you did I rewrite while you were over there? You liberated some of the camps.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you end up with that?
Oh, this was in between Munich and over toward Austria, Salzburg. Out in that area, we opened up one camp that was, I always can see this little old fellow that was a civilian that was working in this, like a factory. Two big furnaces, and they had a metal tray that they'd put bodies on and stick in the furnace. Well, they had regular hours, I guess, I don't know, but that's what it seemed to me. And then after the 5 o'clock whistle, now then, here this little old guy is in there cleaning up. And it was spotless, except off to one side, there were doors, and the ceilings were not too high. And you go into that other room, we couldn't get in there very far. We didn't want to do very much of that. But here in the ceiling is like sprinkler heads, and stacked up just like cordwood. These you hardly say bodies because they were bone and skin.
Did you know before you got there what you were headed into?
Well, the closer we got there, we didn't know that there was a concentration camp like that. We knew that there was we could tell there was prison. And it wasn't quite a circle, but anyhow, we came into it, there were 3 main entrances where you open a big gate and let trucks go in, and that kind of thing. And then there were prisoners, and it wasn't in a circle, but that idea, the second level, there were prisoners with the uniform, the stripes and all that kind of business, and they were not real sad looking. Then you go on into the next space, there would be space in between, and each one of these you went through, it got worse and worse. There were places where, the worst, in the middle, clear inside, you could tell those people were not long for here. And of course, here I was standing there, obviously fed, cigarettes, whatever. And these people they could hardly cry, but they were wanting something to eat. And about that time we got word, don't feed them a thing because they'll eat themselves to death faster than they'll die by withholding. So then we went out, and we were by a lake, and they started around with a boat, and everybody that lived on the lake, that was a quick way to get food, and we started picking up food that we could give them some of ours, not much, but they had right away had medics in there, and anyhow, it was tough to refuse those people anything.
Was it, could you see a change in them seeing that, I imagine they're not looking at you like, oh, you're fed and we're not, but they're looking and saying, you're our freedom.
There was no big excitement. There were more excitement when they opened up prisoner war camps. Oh, these were concentration camps. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do to us?
So they didn't see it as a freedom thing at that point. They thought, Was that more difficult than the battlefront, or can you compare the two?
Well, it's a little difficult to compare. Yeah, it was harder. There not much you could do. Sit there and watch. You get out and you're shooting back at somebody while there's some activity.
Have you ever gone back?
Bev and I went back, year 83, and we just went to Altasse, the salt mine. I had no interest in going anyplace else. The places I would like to have seen, I would have had to have somebody. I'm not that venturesome, but I would have somebody along that was could talk a little bit. I'd like to go back into Czechoslovakia. There were some places there that were interesting, and in Austria, well, I got to see some of those. A few years ago, a group from I sing in barbershop chorus. Anyhow, there were some of us got together and we went to Europe. We went to England and then into Germany, and there was involved how we got in contact with this young lady, but the gal, the wife of one of our barber shoppers, was a teacher, and she had done things with this gal with high school kids from Seattle. So we went to this gal's home. Her father and her brother and her fiancé at that point all belonged to a singing group in a little, I say little village, halfway decent-sized village, Grieskirchen. And they had this, they sang. They had a real great group. So they decided, well, maybe we can sing some of your songs, you can sing some of ours, and we'll stay there, we'll put on a show. Well, we tried to learn their songs, and it just didn't work out, the barbershop thing, in the time that we had. So they decided, well, you put on your part and we'll put on our part. Well, they listened to us rehearse and said, "Well, hello."
I gotta switch a tape here.
Oh, it was obvious that the local civilians had no idea what had gone on there.
So when you liberated this camp, who brought the message went all the way back to SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters, and Eisenhower, and even before that was Patton said, "Get those sons of bitches in here, let them see what's going on." And like I say, obvious, there were some that had to know, but there were also a bunch of people that had no idea. What was, and you say it was men, women, and children?
Oh, the people right here, take a group, and you didn't take 50 or 100, but you took 25.
What was some of the reactions?
Oh, they were horrified. Most of the women were crying all the way through. Men were trying to hold it.
was the camp removed enough from town that out of sight, out of mind, or?
Well, it was like it was removed a little bit, but it was more like a factory. The people that were there, they were too busy, small talk, small time. They're the same people that really didn't realize how bad Hitler was.
Had you realized how bad Hitler was prior to?
Oh, had an idea. Of course, until we got into the war, why it began to be a little more obvious. But also, being on the West Coast, we were thinking more in terms of the Japanese.
Again, that's where geographically it's interesting. I mean, I talked to somebody who grew up in Kansas, World War II.
So?
Yeah. Well, what about rationing? Rationing. Well, what about this, that? Didn't exist.
Yeah.
But then, and I never thought about Gig Harbor and its location, that you've got the Naval Shipyard, you got Fort Lewis and McCord, so you're right in the middle of.
Well, and there are so many other things. You say the Navy Shipyard. What about Bangor, Manchester, Keystone, Keyport? You keep on like that. All these other installations, and while they aren't all big, nevertheless, there's still a bunch of stuff going on there.
See, and that's where, if you were old enough, the war did have a real fear of being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And as you moved further away, less and less, which is with what communications were in that period versus today, where before it happens, we know who's going where in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a crazy world in that way. I talked to one veteran, and they had liberated one of the camps, and he said, for him that was the hardest part, or one of the most powerful parts. He said that they had all been liberated, at the end of the war, and they were joking around and all that, and he said before they got there they could smell it.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the same with?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he said that as they got there, everybody went silent.
Yeah.
And he said they could talk about everything else in the war, but that was, when they got there, they did their stuff, they left, and it was still. He said it was just amazing of what it did of just shutting off all the conversation and everything. Yeah, it's a travesty. I mean, I don't, it's like anything. War is, I've heard some people say, well, war's not people against people. It's governments, or it's a person, that who do you hold animosity towards?
Well, if there's somebody shooting at you, are you going to stop and figure, well, now why? How come? You right quick, you shoot back.
Who did you think, when you went over, in your mind, did you have a vision of who the war was against? Other than we're protecting America? I mean...
Well, I suppose we could say protecting America, but it was more of my feeling, in some fashion, get out from under Hitler and his ilk. The Japanese, they weren't. The individuals were worse it was a strange feeling.
Now I'm making an assumption. Are you a religious person? So, because my question would be is, if you are, did you face a religious dilemma going into battle, or is it? I've heard a lot of people say, "Better thee than me," or better thee than me.
Yeah. I have to admit that I rarely was moved that way. I had other things to do. And
stay alive, be number one.
I caught hell, and I should have caught hell from my family because I wrote very seldom. But when some 3 or 4 guys will crawl over to your foxhole and say, "Here, can you censor this?" We had to censor everything. I was a little too careful, I think. A lot of them they just write, censor it, you mark it down that it was checked. But I would look a little bit, and then I could lick it and seal it and send it. Well, after 3 or 4 fellows or 5 come in, and you don't have that kind of time, and you're thinking about something else, why should I I should have, but I didn't.
That's the thing. To me, it seems like if I'm in the middle of a war, like you said, I'm going to have other things that I'm taking care of. Now, what was your rank?
I was a first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
Mm-hmm. Probably the worst job in the Army is being a platoon leader.
Why so?
Well, if you're doing it right, you are out leading the thing they teach you at Fort Benning, at Benning School for Boys. Follow me. And that's the way so often it have to be. You look and, hey, can you do, why don't you? Well, if you're doing the job right, why, it's no fun.
Was one of your jobs, did you ever have to write letters home to somebody else's parents, or was that?
I didn't do that, especially by the time I got there. The original cadre, original group, there were only 2 or 3 out of the whole company that were there. They were all changed. So we didn't form any real close relationships. And only once, and this was after I was back, and I'm still ashamed of how I wrote it, but there was a notice in American Legion magazine. I don't know if you've seen one of these magazines or not, but they comrades in distress, or have you like a bulletin board. And this one here was a fellow that parents wanting to know if anybody had met their son, and they wanted to know something about if you knew him, how, where was he, where, they wanted something more. And so I saw that. I read it out loud, And everybody was there said, well, you are going to answer. So I did, but instead of spending the whole letter on him, there was hardly anything I could say because he had joined. There were 4 replacements came up that night, and they hardly got to know. And they were in my platoon. They hardly got to know the platoon sergeant, the platoon guide, or the squad leaders, or me. We took off the next morning when we started out. And that's when we were in the skirmish line. After everything got done, I was wandering around looking at all the people where they were. About that time, the battalion commander came along in his half-track, and he said, where did all these guys come from? Who do they belong to? And I said, well, it belonged to me. Man, you want to check some names? And there are 4 fellows laying right there. Came up last night. You can get their names from the first sergeant. Anyhow, here, when I started to write the letter, what do you say that I saw your son long enough to get his name, and I'm sure that the rest of the people in the platoon took care of him. I mean, how much can you say? But I should have. I feel bad that I'm sure that the letter they got was far from satisfactory.
And did I understand right? He was killed?
Yeah, all 4 of those
all 4
replacements were the 4 of those that were killed.
That's again, I mean, what do you say? I mean, in a situation like that.
Yeah, what do you say? But I'm sure that a little bit of, you wouldn't have to go into a preaching, but it would be nice to be able to put a few words together.
Well, did you have friends that you lost in the service with you, or were
not
you
with me? I was so far away from. I went to Europe in an infantry unit. So many of the people around where I came from were well, there were a whole bunch of them had worked for Morrison Knudsen. Just a whole bunch of them. So they went that way.
That's right. I forgot you ended up being the Yankee, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing too. Somebody. Oh, you from Nampa, Idaho, near Boise? Yeah. You Mormon? Everybody wanted to know. Are you a Mormon?
So that's like today if you say you're from Utah, people go,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm from a family of 7. Oh, are you Catholic?
Yeah. Oh, geez.
Do you think that, and I thank you for sharing that part of seeing the bulletin board, and how do you respond to a parent, and again, looking back, and hindsight's always 20/20. Well, I would have done this differently, but do you think that there's any message to be left with generations that you and I'll never meet about World War II or about war as a whole, from your personal view?
I feel a little on the feudal side that there should be things done, but why don't you? No, I just feel kind of frustrated. An exercise in futility. Don't get caught up in whatever. Well, it hardly has anything to do with it. My mother got caught up in the business of who was the senator that was the on the witch hunt for McCarthy. She was, again, American Legion Auxiliary. She was at a national convention, and here he came in carrying a briefcase, and a couple of guards following along, and he put the briefcase up in front of, and he went into his speech. And Mother was taken by this speech. It was, why, he right there in those, in that briefcase, he had all those letters and I said, Mother, he probably could have had yesterday's newspaper in that briefcase and you didn't see it. And besides, if it's super secret, he's not allowed to have it or have it out like that, even though it kind of shocked her. And, well, I think there's a lot of that sort of thing. People are taken in by, again, I'm digressing, the business of the music man. That spellbinder, I'll have his
trouble right here in River
City. Mm-hmm.
I think it has to do with people. There are people with positive charisma and there's people with negative charisma, and somebody that can bring in people like that and get the rather rabid activities going. And
I shouldn't, but I think of Tim Eyman. We're on an entirely different subject, but there is a what? Parallel, yeah. Well,
more things change, the more they stay the same, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Huh.
Well, have I given you enough or too much? Or?
No, quickly, the medals you have in your you have purple. Oh no, you have Purple Heart.
Yeah.
You got that for being wounded.
Yeah.
Silver Star.
There's commendation stuff in there, sort of a story about it, but the Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest, next to Congressional Medal.
Where did you get that? What?
Well, in Europe. Well, right about the time we were in this thing with a battalion commander that near the little village of Schmyra was the name of it. It's hard to find, but it's not too far from Kassel, and then the Silver Star was not too far from Kaiserslautern, and I have to go back and look at the village for Bronze Star. Then, well, the rest of them, participation.
And those are different theaters?
The one is the European theater and the two battle stars, and then there's I could read them off there, that mainly that you were in a place and you participated. Each one of those was important to me because each one of those was worth 5 points. And after you get so many points, well, then you get shipped home. Except that they didn't count officers' points. You just
It's interesting because you talk about them. Oh yeah, they're kind of haphazard. They're medals. You know, I look at those in a bit of awe and respect for what you did, and I think some people would even put it into the hero classification, the people that went and fought for the freedoms that we have today. But it sounds like for you, I mean, I assume you take pride in them.
It's nice to have, and it's nice to have people recognize or know what, but beyond that, I have a very close friend that he's just that far behind me, younger, and he has been, in the last few years, more than just a little, what do I want to say, kind. And he came up with a thing about a week before you called me. He wanted to talk to a friend of his who was with the News Tribune. And he said, "You've done so many things that there should be some recognition just for being." Well, he said, "I'd like to get you some notoriety or something." I said, "Good God, the last thing in the world." Well, he said, "Think about it." So I thought about it, and I called him and I said, "Alec, it's nice, but let's just go back to having our lunch every Wednesday noon and giving each other a bad time. And besides, well, then I got your letter, and I said, besides, you got this." And right, I have already said, haven't you, about the gal from British Broadcasting Company? Okay, all of this occurred right about the same time. Well, I said, "I've got enough. Let's go back. I want to get another glass of beer." And
It's amazing how it all comes into play at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's for us, interviewing the vets has been a real honor, and I've been real fortunate in being able to have conversations with people, especially some that it's real interesting. Where you're very modest with it. Some that they live by whatever they've done forever, and then as I started interviewing, I found out that, and I don't mean to disrespect them, but they weren't somewhere. I mean, they have, their stories didn't hold water, which I felt sad about that. But I've talked to some of the most humble people, and when I learned what they did. But again, the one CB that I talked to, Don Newbold, newbie, who said, no, the heroes are the ones that have a white cross somewhere that didn't come home.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get you on mic so you can go back to having lunch on Wednesday and